Hi everybody, Adrian Plus here,
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
and here we are at the uh, memorable moment when we have actually done 150 Sounding the Shallows.
I know. I know. Do you realise it's almost 3 years?
Blimey.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
And our lovely friend who sends us these really interesting facts about what a number can be says two things came to his mind to do with 150. One
Mhm.
is that there are 150 Psalms.
Mhm.
And the other thing is that, now this is a little more difficult, in 150 AD, Marcion produces his Bible canon, consisting of purged versions of the Gospel of Luke and the 10 Pauline letters. In rejection of his position, a process got underway, and in the end, today's New Testament canon came out. So thank you for
Well, we
that.
all know that, don't we? I have no idea about any of that, but thank you very much.
Yeah.
I must say I am grateful for these things. It
Oh,
opens
fascinating.
new worlds
I
for us.
know. I was interested really to say congratulations to do these recordings. I mean, we were
Mm.
somewhere, weren't we, that puts all the human little achievements that we might do by sitting and doing some
It
recordings into
does actually, yeah,
perspective.
but also it was the beginning of a new bit of our lives this week
Yeah, it was.
because we live only 2 miles from Durham now, which means that we are 2 miles from the cathedral in
Uh-huh.
Durham, which is probably one of the first five most beautiful buildings in the world. And
Yeah.
because of the immobility, it's quite been difficult to work out how to get in there,
And we've
but we've
discovered
now
we
discovered
can.
you can organize, be able to drive up, and because I have one of these wonderful blue badges, we can park out there and I can get onto my steed, my electrically powered steed,
Yeah,
and I cannot tell, and some people will understand this,
we will.
to drive through the doors into the cathedral, which is
Yeah.
magnificent, and to suddenly realize that I can go all round that building, or almost all of it,
Yeah.
was remarkable.
Yeah.
And we had our grandson with us.
We did. And I think that really emphasized the size of it because it's pretty small, being just two. And the cathedral, Durham Cathedral, is ridiculously big, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it
the
is.
pillars are phenomenal. I think they're more than 6 meters round. I mean, they are extraordinary. And just the sheer size of it blows our minds, doesn't it? I think it blew his as well, don't
Yeah,
you?
I watched him just sitting, looking up, and I don't know what was going on in his head, but some kind of awe was happening. I was going to say, one of the stewards told me it took 40 years to build the
Oh,
cathedral, but that is a very short time,
yeah,
apparently, for these buildings. Which is
yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
remarkable, but it's a joy to be able to go there now. It's a real joy, real joy.
yeah. Yeah, and it's always, I mean, cathedrals, I think have perhaps been rather important to us, haven't they? I mean, I grew up in Norwich. Now, that is a very beautiful cathedral, and not only that, but it's a live church,
Mm.
and it's got a warmth to it, and it's a beautiful spire and a lovely close. So even though it wasn't my church, I kind of always had a fondness for it. And I mean, you've loved Salisbury Cathedral and
Mm.
Winchester Cathedral, and they
Norwich,
are, and Norwich, yeah,
Ripon,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
they're
So,
lovely.
why are they so important to us?
I don't know. I think that they've always been very peaceful places. I mean, I don't know what they've been in the past. I mean, reading John Betterman, they were more like village social groups,
Ah,
all sorts of stuff going
yeah.
on in
Well,
them.
apparently in Durham, Adrian, there would not have been any seats in that nave.
Yeah.
That would have all just been open space for people to wander around in
Mm.
and, as you say, do all sorts of things, really.
But I mean, the things I've read suggest cathedrals, and it's pretty obvious, I suppose, were almost certainly built to show the size and grandeur of God
Mm,
in the middle of areas where very ordinary people lived and had very little.
yeah.
Um, and I was thinking about that, about the effect of that, if you live in the village and it's years ago and you don't read and you don't know much
Mm,
about what the story of the
mm,
Gospels say,
mm, mm.
do you want a God that is that big? I mean, I don't know, but I wonder if it was comforting to have a
So
great big building.
great big arms around you. Do you remember when it was Hillsborough, wasn't it? The tragedy there, and people of all walks of life went into the cathedral
Yeah, they did.
to
Yeah,
to
yeah,
mourn, and
yeah.
then much later, when there were results of the court cases and all sorts of things, they gathered again.
Mm.
And there is something about these vast buildings. They're anonymous too, aren't they? You can wander in. You
Mm.
don't. I mean, I love our church, but it's not a wandering in with nobody noticing you sort of church.
Far from it.
No,
No,
and that's
no.
lovely. And lots of churches should be welcoming and warm and cozy and familial.
Mm.
But a cathedral has a separateness, doesn't it?
It does, although, I mean, I must say Ripon, which we love going to, Ripon Cathedral. If a cathedral can be cozy, then Ripon is a
Mm,
cozy
mm,
cathedral. So
mm.
they do vary, but they're all fascinating. But I was thinking about Rafa and about, because we have him 1.5, 1 3/4 days a week, don't
Yeah.
we? About uh, the fact that we want him to have the best of us,
Mm,
and
mm.
um,
Well, he's
when
learning loads of
when
stuff at
when
the
people
moment.
look up at that huge cathedral, or they used to look up at that huge cathedral, whether they ever wondered or realized that the story of, I mean, this is only Christianity, all faiths have their ways into this sort of truth that um, God is even bigger than a cathedral. He's even bigger than a cathedral,
Mm,
but has been willing to become exactly the same size as the humans,
mm.
so that we can learn the most important thing of all, which is how much he does actually care, and how much
Absolutely.
we need to learn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is extraordinary, isn't it, when you think about it? I mean, we looked at this very small person in this huge cathedral. I can't help thinking God looks at us and uh, we're hardly the same size as him in terms of,
Very tiny, tiny things.
yeah.
But I mean, going back to Rafa's learning all sorts of things at the moment. We've got new words every day, which is great. And but sometimes, and I think a lot of us slightly bigger people, uh, we get very impatient. I mean, you've had this with him, haven't you?
Well, only because I made the mistake of showing him the greenhouse and telling him we were going to plant tomatoes.
Mm.
And I really think he thought the next week there would be big, fat, red tomatoes.
Oh, he thought it would take that long, did
Yeah,
he?
well, they were on the seed packet.
Yeah.
And, I do, and I've shown him since that we've put his seeds into little pots.
Mm,
There's absolutely nothing to
mm,
see. So, yes, I realized that maybe I made a mistake there. But yeah, the idea of things that are growing for all of us, actually. I mean,
mm.
I think I said before, we've inherited a garden that was
Yeah.
loved.
In our new house.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so we've
outside our new house.
got things bobbing up all
Yeah.
over the place that have been planted for this other person's enjoyment.
Mm,
And, lots of beautiful daffodils and narcissi, and now some tulips coming up. And I'm
mm,
thinking, these were planted for somebody else, but they're there for us.
mm,
And I mean, if you think about a cathedral, it was built, as you say, for the glory of God, but nearly 1,000 years ago for the people that lived then.
mm.
Do you
That's
think
right.
they thought of it as being something that would be forever for people? Maybe they did.
Yeah, they did. I remember that poem. I can't remember what. All I can remember is of the poem is about. If anyone knows, I would love to remember it. It's about the building of a cathedral, and it's
Ah,
one man pointing up to the very top and saying in ripish language, "I did that.
one of the little bits of
I did
carving.
that."
Yeah.
Incidentally, I had the
Mm.
same experience with radishes when I was a little boy. But on the
You were a bit bigger than two,
on
weren't
the
you?
packet, they were huge
Yes.
things with great long green fronds coming out of the top, and I was a little bit disappointed when it took a long time, and then they were very small things. But
Oh, come on. You were delighted
well, I
when.
took them home to my mother,
Yes.
my first harvest,
That's
And
right. Don't knock
we had
it.
radishes. No,
You had
it
radishes for
was
tea.
exciting.
Come
It was
on.
exciting.
But it took time,
Yeah.
absolutely, and it did involve a little bit of disappointment. Yeah.
But I was thinking
So,
about our determination to. We're talking about grandson a lot, but I mean, he's with us a lot. We love him very much, and we want him to encounter not the bigness of us, but the best of us.
mm,
And I was thinking about all those we encounter. It's a for us. It's something we've thought about a lot over the years.
and I'm sure people will hear us saying these
Yeah.
things. Really,
How do we do that with people? How do we try hard to encounter to make sure people encounter the best of who and what we are when they need us? Not an
and
easy
you've got an
question.
answer.
I haven't, but this 2 weeks just gone. I've become faintly as obsessed as I do sometimes
Ah, yes.
with a Welsh phrase.
Now I'm going to enjoy this. Yes, Adrian?
Now I don't speak Welsh, and I don't have any pretensions towards understanding Welsh, but I will tell you what the phrase is in Welsh. It's cadw ti mewn cwmwl tistion, which translates almost directly as keeping house in a cloud of witnesses.
So is that a
Keeping
phrase
house in a cloud of witnesses.
used in churches? I mean, used as
Well, it might be, but I do know, because Rowan Williams says so in his book,
Okay.
that it's kind of become a phrase people use.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's about a way of living, a way of presenting yourself to people. And when I read that, apart from being fascinated by the Welsh, because cadw ti mewn cwmwl tistion, it's wonderful to say, and that's it. That's my Welsh, and that's probably badly read. But there's something about the simplicity of that and the picture of it that is pleasingly undramatic and helpful about quietly and thoughtfully preparing our lives for people who might arrive or for people who watch to find out how we speak.
It's actually huge, isn't it? It's like all the most important things. It's the more you think about it, that there is an awareness. There's an awareness of what? There's an awareness that God is aware of it, but there's also an awareness that everything that we do and say and are is surrounded by a cloud of witnesses, all the people we meet every day, which is a bit of challenging, really. I remember years and forever ago, Adrian, when we were doing would you remember when we were doing that little TBS program? And because it was very late at night, there were all sorts of
taxi drivers,
odd people, but
drivers, publicans, university students, slightly drunk.
But people who might be watching it late. Well, there was one day when I was struggling to get my two small sons onto the bus, and we had a double buggy that didn't fold up very well. And I think I'm talking about a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And it wasn't a good struggle. They didn't want to be on the bus, and I couldn't make the buggy fold up properly. And the bus driver was getting very cross. And I suddenly thought, on this bus is a cloud of witnesses. There may be somebody who has watched this program and thought, these people have got the answer. I don't think they thought it that morning.
No, although later experience has shown us quite clearly that people do rejoice just a little bit at other people having the same problems. But I think a long time ago, before even that, we had to learn a lesson in our late 20s when we, in a fairly troubled time for us, we went and lived and worked for a little while.
Oh, yes.
You tell people what it was.
Well, I mean, it's called Burswood in the village of Groombridge in Kent. And it was founded by somebody called Dorothy Kerrin. It was a place of medical and spiritual healing. So there were always, every week, there were services for healing, but there was also very expert medical care. So it wasn't one or t'other. It was the combination of both. And it was very helpful for both of us in many ways, wasn't it? And it was hard work.
But Yeah, you were doing housework, and
I was
I
on the
was
cleaning team.
washing up pots and pans.
You were?
Every day we did that, which was
Yeah.
fine. But the thing that first impressed us, I think, was that everywhere we went in the building, people were, I would say, happily and busily behaving as if they were expecting a very important visitor shortly.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true.
And
Whether you were cleaning taps
whatever
or
you
you
were
were,
doing, yeah.
yeah.
And I remember asking someone who'd been there for years about it, and them saying, "Yeah, well, that is what we're doing.
Mm.
Every person who comes through the door is important, and for us, Jesus is important. So,
and we want to be ready for if he walks through the
yeah,
door
if he walked
into
through the
our
door,
house.
that's right. Yeah, and
That's right.
we thought that was great, but we weren't very impressed, if you remember, at first anyway. We'd come from a slightly boundaried background by what we saw as a lack of really overt spiritual conversation and activity.
Well, it was more that it was not really encouraged.
No, that's
I would
right.
even
Yeah,
go as far as to say
yeah,
it wasn't
yeah.
allowed, because I remember we were really thought that was a bit ridiculous. But then some people came who were absolutely sure what they thought, absolutely sure what they believed, absolutely sure that everybody else was wrong, and we realised that it wasn't a good idea to talk about things, but it was a good idea to work as though Jesus would walk through the door, to work as though each person was him.
Yeah,
And
that's
that we
right.
were
Yeah.
caring. I mean, it did get, I
And
think,
um, when the need to prepare a place where people could be held and cared for, a difficult time in their lives, and the practical things involved in that were quite small and quite ordinary and essential, weren't they? But yeah, there were some silly things.
well, no, I
Well, a
remember
bit silly.
you were in the kitchen, you were part of preparing the tea trays, and I don't know whether it was silly or not, but
I
the
don't
person
know
we
either.
were working with would say now she would love that sugar bowl.
Well, she actually said to
And
me, I want you to think about the person and
yeah,
think which sugar bowl
yeah,
would be the right
yeah.
one for them. Yeah.
And to some extent, that is what we do, isn't it? I mean,
I suppose
we
so.
don't want to intimidate people by
No.
showing off things if that would be a situation that would be inappropriate. On the other hand, we want to, yeah, it's really tricky, this one, because in a way that is what you do. You think, how can I make this meal? How can I make this situation? How can I make looking after a child you're given, how can I make it the best experience for them? And sometimes that means that it isn't going to be about what you thought would be perfect, but what they would think
Yeah. And
was.
also for the person in charge of that, the amount of care that was put into that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember when I first started doing that, and she said, "Now this is Mrs. Johnson's tray.
Yes.
Choose a sugar bowl." And I
Yeah.
pictured Mrs. Johnson, who was rather large. I looked at the sugar bowls and I thought,
Do I choose
no,
a
no, no,
large
no, I
sugar
don't
bowl?
give her a large sugar bowl. Should I give her a little sugar bowl to show that we haven't noticed she's, it's absolutely ridiculous. And actually, in the end, I thought, well, I like that sugar
I
bowl. I
think
might
you got
put it
into
on a
it a little
jug.
bit,
So I
especially as we
suppose.
got to know them a
Yeah.
little bit.
And we did learn a lot there.
Oh, we learnt
We
so
learned a lot.
much.
We learned to keep our mouths shut more,
Yes, we did.
and to value the ordinary. It wasn't perfect. Nowhere is. No one is. But for
No.
us, over all these years, it was a really valuable legacy.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. We've talked about the legacy of cathedrals, the legacy of Burswood for us, and what we'd like to be the legacy for Rafa. And I'm sure people feel the same about children and grandchildren and great grandchildren that they've got. But um, it
And
can
we
be
did,
in any form, can't it?
yeah,
And in a way, the cathedral is almost a metaphor for that, isn't it?
yeah,
For
yeah.
showing something more than man,
But yeah, but starting with the things that
but starting
actually
small.
touch people. I
Yeah.
made a list like his mummy and daddy do. We give him a warm bed, lots of stories, a clean nappy when he needs it, or you do. Food that's nice and easy to eat, as well as being good for him. Treats, lots of laughs and cuddles, and the sound of kind voices most of the time. Most of the
He
time.
is only just
Only
two. We
just two,
may
yeah.
We may have to change that a little bit as we go through this
Yeah,
year.
we will.
But
That's part of
you're
loving him,
right.
though,
It's
isn't
a
it?
kind of
Yeah,
house that we will keep.
yeah.
And I
And
know.
those things are the things will make the discipline possible,
Mm,
because
mm,
he knows the
mm.
love.
But I was thinking, Adrian, the other end of life. I know somebody who listens to us who cared for her mother very, very carefully, although it wasn't easy when she had dementia at the end of her life. I know that looking after my mother when she came to live with us and die with us with cancer, making her life the
Mm,
very best that it could be involved sometimes turning everything on our heads that we might have thought were important.
mm,
So that the tiniest thing, making sure, I remember making sure that her teacup only had enough tea in it so she could, with her tiny bit of strength, lift it and
mm,
drink it and retain the dignity of being somebody who could
mm,
drink from her own teacup. And that sounds so small,
mm.
but in a way, that's the same as the sugar bowl, isn't it? The same as the,
Yeah,
thinking
yeah,
of the
yeah,
very best
yeah.
moment thing
Mm,
that you could do. And I know there'll be many people who listen to us who have cared for people or are in the process of it, because you get to that point, don't you, where your children are grown up and you move into caring for people who cared for you.
mm. And that's happening more and more, of course, as people live much longer. And I suppose in the end, it's an obvious thing to say, but there are no small or large things,
No.
um, because everything has an impact. Everything matters to people. But
Yeah.
if we can manage that, it's not a bad start to care, is it,
No.
for people?
No.
Um, and um,
No, of course it's not. And I mean, I know again, I know there'll be people who think, oh, yeah, I've heard this many times, but your experience when you were a little boy, you might as well tell it again because I love hearing it and some people might not have
well,
heard
it's
it.
only a small.
No,
I was
it's not a
going to say
small
it's only.
thing.
It's not. It was a huge
Exactly.
thing.
Trust.
It was another of those unsigned gifts from God that
Yeah.
you get sometimes, and it's worth looking back at your life, especially those who are perhaps have got trapped into thinking only the things that happened after what we call conversion mean anything, which is utter nonsense. Um, but that, yeah, as a little boy on a bus, I had read some words in a book which said "everybody is I," and words fascinated me then; they still do. And I wanted to know what it meant, and I couldn't. I said it to myself over and over again on the bus as I travelled along, and there was a lady on a crossing who I didn't know what a stroke was then, but she must have had a stroke. One
Yeah.
side of her mouth had dropped and she looked a bit strange. And I looked at her in amazement and thought, she is the most important person in the
In
world.
her universe, I
In
remember
the
you saying,
world,
yeah,
yeah. I
yeah,
mean, because from
yeah.
her point of view, she was the star in the film of her life, and I was a bit player. And then the ticket inspector came along, and I looked at him, and he must have thought, this is a mad child. And I
Mm,
looked at him and I thought, you're the most important person in the world.
mm,
Do you know that?
mm,
And it didn't do me much good at the time. But it was a real gift
mm.
to have a tiny, tiny insight into the perspective of God.
Yeah,
That no matter who you see or who you meet, they
yeah.
are, and how you do this, of course, we don't know. The logic in the Christian faith has defeated me long ago. But yeah, it was really important. It's a privilege. It really is. If you can do it, it's a tough call. Keeping house for a cloud of witnesses, as that Welsh
Mm,
thing said.
mm,
Being ready for the ones who come. And
mm.
I was thinking today that I don't actually know for sure, but I do hope Jesus had a really good time with his mum and dad and had a very good beginning.
You get the feeling he did,
I think he
but
might have
obviously
done,
we never
yeah.
know, and we've got so
Yeah.
many children's pictures to assure us
Well,
that he
that's
did,
true.
but we don't know, but we assume so.
Well, there it
I
is.
don't think I don't think they would have decided I mean, we know that Mary was really brave young girl, and we know that Joseph was an amazing man to cope with
Yeah.
what happened with Mary and
Yeah.
to listen to the dreams, to listen to act on them. So I think it would have been pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, so Cadw te mewn hwnnw Christian. Pardon my Welsh. See you next week.
Bye bye.